It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstye Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media industrial business complex as it hobbles through our modern times. Steve, how are you doing this weekend?
A hobble is the correct word for sure. Well, I was told yesterday, we're recording this on Saturday, that there's apparently a hurricane coming. So I didn't realize that until yesterday. So, that's the wonders of living on the Gulf Coast. So hopefully I won't drown. Hopefully I'll be around for the next show and not have been washed away by Tropical Depression 14, such as it is right now. We'll see. But at this point, I'm used to it, so it can't. Nothing can be as bad as Hurricane Harvey was. That's my hope.
Yes, no hurricanes. Hurricane season with most of my family on coastal East Coast. I definitely hold my breath every July through October.
Apparently, what I was told was that there were, the Weather Service confirmed this, there's Tropical Depression 13 and 14 are both aiming for the Gulf Coast at the same time. So that's new, because 2020 isn't bad enough. Let's have two hurricanes at once. Right.
We got to up the ante.
Thank you. This is like whatever higher power you believe in, he or she is punishing this planet for its sins or something. I don't know.
Next is locusts and frogs, apparently.
Yeah, there you go. What are the 7 signs? Is it? We've been through a couple of them, surely already.
Hey, it was the cicada year in the Mid-Atlantic. Well, there we go. Enough of biblical plague talk, and let's get to what really matters, and that is the comings, the goings, the insides and outs of this past 2 weeks in sports business news. And we're going to start looking at what's going on with the Big Ten, which seems to be in a bit of disarray, or at least doesn't have unified thinking, and it looks like it's not going to play football this fall. Steve, what is the crux of the debate?
Well, the really fun part is that a bunch of parents are threatening to sue the Big Ten now. So the crux of the debate basically is that not everybody, the commissioner of the Big Ten for sure does not want to have a season in 2020 at least, and he's doing that for liability reasons. I think the fear on the leadership of the Big Ten's part is that you have a bunch of people get sick or die, and then all of a sudden they're on the hook for a class action lawsuit. I think that's what their fear is. Now, the debate here is that a good number of the schools and the parents of players and a bunch of the players all want to play, and what we've had is a bunch of schools actually talking about playing on their own if possible. So it's a big controversy. Now, with the parents, I don't know if they have any standing for a lawsuit like this. Their kids aren't even minors, anymore, so they can't, I don't know if the parents could even file a lawsuit. But the bigger issue is that they're threatening to. And I think the argument from the parent side is it's far safer to have my kid playing football in an organized setting than having all these kids home with no controls at all. And that's a very valid argument, I think. You can disagree with it, obviously, but I think that's certainly a point worthy of debate. And I think the major crux from the Big Ten perspective, again, is they're less afraid of the results of playing and more afraid of the liability problem going forward. So apparently, maybe by the time you guys listen to this, there will be a lawsuit on file, because apparently the deadline was Monday, meaning for us 2 days from now, for you listening 2 days ago. So we'll see, but I kind of understand where the parents are coming from. I just don't think they have a standing to get an injunction. I'm assuming what they're aiming for is to get an injunction to have a court order the Big Ten to play. Now, the other part of this that's interesting is that there's a big controversy over whether the schools actually voted on this, whether the athletic departments or the school presidents actually voted or not. These parents have asked for records indicating what the vote is, and the Big Ten has thus far refused to do it. So there's a lot of controversy going on in the Big Ten. The other thing is, I mean, the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC are all playing. Pac-12 is supposedly out, which isn't surprising given the political climate on the West Coast. Um, I don't know what becomes of the college football season as a result of all this. We're not going to have a BCS. Um, it's going to be a really weird couple months in this regard. Your thoughts?
Well, I'd be curious to see, are these parents willing to sign waivers? Are they, and there's a lot of parents, a lot of players, a lot of teams, a lot of people, right? So consensus is going to be nigh impossible. But are parents and players willing to sign waivers that it's similar to these other pro sports? Now I know there's big differences between pro and college sports, but if you look at the Big Ten's reasons in terms of liability and whatnot, they would to negate that issue, that concern for them, they would need that kind of waiver that parents, families, players are not going to hold the universities or the Big Ten culpable if anything happens. I mean, that it seems like that's going to be the Big Ten's position, right? If that's the reason they're making these decisions, then they're going to need some kind of protection from liability.
Yeah, and it's a lot of people to get to sign a document in what's not a long period of time because I believe there are games in 2 weeks. I believe there are some college football games in 2 weeks. So I will look that up before we end the segment here. But yeah, and the other thing is, it's such a liability waiver would have to be releasing the Big Ten and each individual school both here because and there's no college sports union to deal with to make it easy. So you'd have to go through a bunch of lawyers for each individual school separately, none of whom are going to have the same opinion as to the language on and then each parent is going to have a lawyer look at it separately potentially, or could at least. So it's a huge mess, and to get that done now, this is something they should have worried about in like May. Not if they're going to do it, it should have been done months ago, not 2 weeks before, because it would be hard enough between even one party to get a release like that done in 2 weeks. I've just from experience, it would be tough, and when you're dealing with literally, 1,000 players maybe, each with different families and different, everything else. I mean, at this point, I'd almost say it's impossible.
Yeah, no, I think it is impossible. I just think that's what that's
Yeah,
what the
that
Big
would solve
Ten
the
would need.
problem.
I mean that's at least their position. He's kind of been in
Of course, it
the
doesn't really solve the problem. It solves the legal problem. It wouldn't solve the PR problem,
no.
right? Because that's a whole nother discussion, which is almost more interesting.
He's been in the news, obviously for this, but you have to think. But he's also been in the news just as his relation to Jason Wright's hiring with the Washington football team. But you got to think Kevin Warren was, rethinking leaving the Minnesota Vikings front office would be one of my big takeaways. Because that's a lot easier to deal with than this. I mean, not that he would have known that he would have to deal with this, but
I know it's like welcome to the job. Here's the worst crisis in the history of college football.
right, yeah.
Congratulations, deal with this.
So, and honestly, and I'm happy to talk about them, and they're interesting, and I probably have opinions, but I mean, my big takeaway on all of this has been, I've been pretty consistent on, whether they play or not, I actually don't care, to be honest at this point. Do what you want, whatever. I think it just, this is the hurricane is going to level college sports. And I didn't say college football, I said college sports. And the governing bodies and the relationships that govern the sports. This is going to lay waste to all this, because all of this is shining a light on all the problems, all the tenuous relationships, all the backroom dealings, all the fiefdoms and sort of distributed power. None of this is going to survive, and we're seeing that when you have a crisis. And depending, it doesn't really even matter your opinion about the crisis. The crisis exists. we see that none of these institutions that govern college sports are able to survive this, are able to handle it well.
Well, yeah, the NCAA clearly isn't equipped to handle something like this. The problem, like we've talked about before, is that the finances of how college sports works says that if you eliminate the Big Ten football season, for example, that has lasting consequences down the road for the non-revenue sports, which is basically everything but football and men's basketball and a little bit of men's baseball. Everything else loses money. You know, I wouldn't swear to my life that women's college basketball is a huge loser just because they do have some games broadcast. But by and large, everything but the two sports I just said, football and men's basketball, basically are being supported by those two sports. So it's not just as simple as we need to protect the players, but from the big picture standpoint, what you're talking about here. Oh, by the way, before I get to that, the other thing is in terms of the PR hit, the Big Ten. If you're listening to this, my view of it is this: you can't win. No matter what you do, you can't win because if you cancel a season, half the people will be mad at you for canceling the season. And if you don't cancel the season, the other half of the people are going to be mad at you for hypothetically at least, putting kids at risk. There's not a good solution to this from a PR perspective. And in that respect, I kind of respect the opinion of the UFC more than anything. Dana White was basically said, just took it. We're going to have the UFC. It's going to go forward. I'm going to take the PR hit from people, and that's the end of it. That would be my vote from a PR perspective if I was in charge of Big Ten. But to your bigger point, I hope it's the catalyst that ends the NCAA. You know what the real fundamental problem is? The real fundamental problem is that the NCAA doesn't really actually have any power. The NCAA as an entity doesn't. What the NCAA is dominated by are the commissioners of the big five power conferences. That's the problem. At the end of the day, they kind of dictate to the NCAA and then throw in administrative stupidity at a massive level, and it's just a recipe for disaster. So, yeah, I hope there's a reorganization, but unless those five people who are in charge of the Power Five conferences all sort of agree to have an overlord, I don't know how it changes for the better. It's going to change. I just don't know how it changes for the better.
Yeah, I don't know. It probably. I have no idea. I'm not even going to suggest that there's. I have an inkling of the solution. I imagine it's probably some spin off of some kind of pseudo semi pro aspect of football and maybe basketball that emerges from this, and some kind of probably flattening and then rebuilding in more of a kind of collegiate amateur atmosphere of the rest of the sports. I mean, because and I know these don't make money necessarily, but if you peel back the veneer of even your, I don't know, let's call them Olympic sports, right? Your swimming, your track and fields. There's an audience. They don't make money, right? They're not big consumer things, but there's an industry. There's a high school to Olympics pipeline. There's federal interest in maintaining these programs because of the Olympics. So things like swimming and track and field were similarly jokes already in college sports in terms of who goes there, how do they get placed, scholarships. So the rot is pretty deep already, and we're gonna see all of those things come to light. And unfortunately we haven't been able to watch the Olympics this summer, but if you remember, you see, oh, here's a track star, let's call it from somewhere in the Caribbean, goes to University of Miami. They all go to American, so the whole system here. Now the outputs might be different, but the whole thing is fake, right? And so at some point, they're gonna have to figure out a way that colleges, private and public, are not subsidizing international sports competitions, because that's really where we're at. And so when that starts to crack, the whole thing is going to crumble because it's all interconnected, it's all huge, and it's got implications that when it falls are just going to splatter everywhere.
Yeah, well, when you're talking about non-American Olympic athletes, most of them are pros, by the way. I
Yeah.
mean, the original spirit and intent of the Olympics was amateur, nobody gets paid. The new Olympics, not the ancient Greek Olympics, when it started again in what, 18 something, 100 something was it? The original intent was it's the true, pure athletic competition. They're all amateurs, nobody's getting paid. That's not what any of it is. Even the American athletes, half of them are pros too
No.
now.
Yeah.
And you're
Dream
right to
team.
say when you, yeah, right, exactly. And you're right when you say that you have the whatever, Bahama, the guy from the Bahamas who's running the 400 meter. Yeah, he's from the University of Oregon or whatever, and he's just going home because he's got a family member that's from the Caribbean or something like that. It's all a big farce. It truly is. And by the way, the Olympics makes multiple billions of dollars, itself, that the money's going somewhere. It's certainly into the hands of NBC, but a bunch of people are making money. We're back to the same argument that there's not a good solution to, which is certainly universities, certainly the American Olympic Committee are getting rich off the backs of unpaid athletes. The problem is, it sounds really good for people who don't know what they're talking about to say, "Oh yeah, players should be paid." But there's a whole bunch of complex issues that go along with that we've done multiple shows on that I don't really want to rehash again here. But the simple version of it is you can't just pay college athletes. There's a bunch of legal reasons why. Title IX is one of them. There's a bunch of reasons why you can't just, there's been a lawsuit about it, by the way. The quarterback of the Northwestern football team already filed a lawsuit several years ago over this and lost, and was not allowed to form a union. And the NLRB didn't come out and blatantly say they aren't employees, but they got close. So there's a whole bunch of issues, and it's not just as simple as some of these like ESPN talking heads who are morons say, they just need to be paid. It's just so much more complicated than that. And so I don't know what the answer is to this. What I do know is what I said in the beginning, which is the Big Ten does not have a good answer. They're going to make half the people mad no matter what. And if it were me, yeah, maybe they need to get a liability release going, but I would play. I'm in favor of getting back to normal as soon as possible. But beyond that, when you can't win, to me, the answer is action, not inaction. So that's what I would do.
I think what it for is not, and I'm not here to relitigate, and I don't actually even disagree that the current system makes it very difficult to pay players, right? It's designed to not pay players. So that's all you sort of need to say. But I just don't think those systems hold, and there's and so I think it's immensely fascinating. I mean, is there a licensing deal with somebody like LSU? Like how does the is the SEC Alex Zeiss's wet dream of the the undercard pro league at some point with like licensing deals to those universities? Quite frankly, it's the most viable path to an alternative football league that's ever been suggested. So I mean, what is it actually going to look like? And I say you can't just sit there as a talking head and say let pay the players, even though if I may even philosophically believe in that, but I think legally, practically, logistically it can't be done right now. But I think what it does force is it forces an interesting, if a campus isn't if a campus is online for fall semester, and the universities are not rebating any of that tuition, how do you actually make football players play, right? So it starts to say, aren't they students? Now we know this is fake, right? So I'm not sitting here, but if the legal system, the practical financial system is based on that idea, which it is, then how do you say the football team must come back and operate as students on campus, et cetera, and no other students are? And that crux of it is where it starts to break the crack in the facade that exists.
Yeah, and let's be honest, certainly some of them are academically oriented people, but a lot of these kids at the Power 5 conferences are not college material. They're student athletes in name only. Most of them don't graduate. a lot of them aren't even taking full course load. They're taking the minimum course load required to be considered a full-time student, and they're not taking classes. Half of them are taking majors designed intentionally for athletes. And a lot of them, I'm glad they're getting a chance, because I think one of the great things about the amateur athletic system is you get kids to college who otherwise wouldn't go. But if they're not real students, kind of what's the point? They're being used and they're not getting anything out of it, you know? So, I mean, I'm all in favor, as I've said before. It sounds like you probably are too, Chris. Just give up the facade completely.
Yeah, I think it's the only real solution.
I kind of get where Alex East is coming from. When it's let's stop pretending that the University of Alabama, for example, football team is an actual amateur football team. Just make them the professional team from Alabama, sponsored by the University of Alabama, if you want, and be done with it. The problem is, there's no real motivation to do this. The NFL has no motivation to do it. They're already getting a free feeder system. Why would they want to sponsor it? And the University of Alabama is already making a ton of money off football now. So why would they want to do this and have to pay players a certain amount of money? Why would they want to set up a system like that? There's nobody on the side you and I are talking about who has any clout that could get it done, which is why it's not getting done, because the people in charge are the ones who are getting the free money.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
I don't disagree. I say, well, except for at some point they may be forced to figure something out. And where I think that maybe, like, let's say if I ran the SEC, and this is where at some point the SEC is going to say, you know what? We may be interested in going out on our own and figuring something out, much like you just described. And because if everything's a joke, it was already broken. Now it's broken and sort of, shown to be what it is to the more, larger populace. The SEC looks at themselves and say, the relationship to the NCAA is useless and harmful, quite frankly. We have a tight union of these schools. We have the best product of college football. What's to say at some point, like self-determination and creating a fiscal relationship with those schools, and that they may be the leaders because they have potentially the most to gain, and if they just act as themselves, they may be able to figure it out.
I mean, maybe the Power 5 conferences form another.
Yeah.
Just give the NCAA the middle finger and form their own league. They, call, I don't know, make up a name, the Power 5 football league, and just ignore the BCS, keep 100% of the money for themselves. Because I mean, the BCS, the overwhelming bulk, the way the finances work is the overwhelming bulk of the money goes to the Power 5 conferences, which is why the Utahs and Boise States of the world are cut out, because they don't really even want them involved. But the other money does trickle down to other schools, and there's nothing to say, like you exactly said, Chris. There's nothing to say you couldn't get the Pac-10, the Big 10, the SEC, ACC, and what am I missing? Big 12 together and form the Power 5 league and just cut everybody out. It's pretty cynical, but certainly it could be done. It could absolutely be done. You couldn't have that become a pro league and start paying their players and all that, because you have the same Title IX and other federal level issues, but you could definitely cut the other schools out of the money.
And for a lot of schools,
and just be free of NCAA regulation.
And quite frankly, for a lot of schools where they have football teams, but it's not that important, them cutting football probably is smart. Smart from a Title IX perspective, smart from a cost. You get some mid-level college that's maybe even still Division I, right? Let alone Division I AA. And the economics start to make more sense for them to continue without football.
Yeah, and by the way, I think that you get a bunch of egghead, academics in charge of these universities who I sometimes don't see the value of athletics. I do see the value of amateur athletics. I think there is something to be said for the development of young people when they participate in athletics at an amateur level and they compete and they learn to be on a team, or they learn to strive and excel while simultaneously doing academics. I don't think it's accurate or fair to just completely cut athletics out of university life. I think it has a place, um, and I think it's a part of the mission of universities to develop that aspect of young people. So, but yeah, I mean, some schools maybe so. We'd have to look at the numbers, and it was just hard to do. But the Missouri States of the world, do they really need football? Would it be better to just not focus on football and fund a bunch of other sports? Maybe. The problem again is even in that respect, they just don't. The only money they get is through March Madness and the BCS.
Well,
College football.
it's easier to carry your basketball team than your football team, so I don't think the basketball teams would get cut. It's just cheaper.
Yeah, and there's fewer players
Yeah.
involved, and it's easier to manage and all that. The other, by the way, the other part of why some of this can't be done easily is the television contracts. I don't know if we've talked about this before, Chris. I mean, the television contracts are done by conference. Okay, in case anybody doesn't know this, unless you're Notre Dame, the schools in the Power Five conferences have ceded / relinquished their broadcast rights to their conferences. That's why you have the Pac-12 network and the SEC network and all this. And so it's not just as easy to have like one particular school pull out of this. That's why, like, for the Big Ten conference, the Big 12, the Big Ten controversy that we started this segment with, Nebraska is the school that's most up in arms, and the people of Nebraska, the parents of Nebraska, they're the leader of the pack of the we need to play. But what University of Nebraska can't do is just give the middle finger to the Big Ten and just go on their own because they've given their broadcast rights to the conference. So that's another complicating factor. Notre Dame is the only one, and BYU presumably, since they're independent too, but nobody cares about BYU. Notre Dame is the only one with any clout that has maintained their own broadcast rights, which is why you saw for years NBC had an exclusive deal with Notre Dame. So that's a whole nother. There's so many layers to this. This is why people can't solve the problem, because it's too complicated to solve. It's just way too complicated to solve. It's, believe it or not, easier to negotiate a CBA with the NBA and the NBA Players Union to solve this problem.
Immensely so. And I think that what we're going to see is that the only real solutions is break it and rebuild it, because
at a major like federal level. Yeah.
And the NFL will care eventually, because the reality is their talent pipeline is getting completely screwed up now, for at least this year. How do you have tape on guys? How do you run the draft? The combine is going to take on immensely more importance, this coming winter than previously. It was already very important, not like it wasn't. But
are you even going to have a combine in February?
Or they taped workouts, whatever it is. I mean, how they evaluate players. I didn't
mean from a Corona standpoint. I meant if you don't have a season and you're going to have 2 of the 5 Power 5 conferences playing in the spring, hypothetically, do you need to move the combine to like June?
Yeah. Right. And then there's eligibility. And I think it was someone, who was it? It was one of the, I think it was Saban.
I think the NCAA is about to pass a rule that eliminates the eligibility problem for this year, by the way.
Yeah, they should.
Pending. Yeah, they should.
And Nick Saban said something pretty smart, and I'm not a big Nick Saban guy, but he said you can't, he's like, if you're going to do spring seasons or whatever, you have to understand you're talking about a JV level product, because only freshmen and sophomores are going to play. Or, at least at the top half of your talent roster, which on a college football team might be 30, 40 players. So, those juniors and seniors who think even they have a whiff of making it in the NFL, or at least want to give themselves a shot, would be idiotic to put their bodies on the line in a spring football league.
Yeah, you'd have to be out of your mind to play in the spring, yeah, for sure. Even like you said, we're not even talking about the number 1 draft picks. It's like anybody who has any thought whatsoever of playing in the NFL, you would be foolish to set foot on a college football field. Just say, I'm done. Here's my tape. Send me to a workout combine. I'll roll the dice. That's by far a better option. It's just crazy. I don't know what the solution is. It's the problem is, again, it's so complicated that there isn't an easy solution. there isn't even an easy solution in the short term. What do we do right now?
No.
You know, much less the big picture. Yeah, I hate to say this because it's sort of contrary to every fiber of my being, but Congress may have to solve the problem. Now, Congress is utterly incapable of solving any problem. Congress can't even, solve their own problems internally, much less Congress is the worst organization. I mean the Senate in the House, both, for the people who think I'm getting political. Just generally speaking, the legislative branch is a complete disaster, and they can't do anything right. But I think it may take Congress to fix the amateur athletics problem generally.
It's going to take some level of reset that excuses, changes, makes exceptions for whatever versions these laws that now have this as a Rubik's Cube.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. And Congress is the only one to do it. Now, they're utterly incapable of it because all Congress does anymore is fight between parties, and it's all about power and whatever side of the aisle you fall on. Your side is trying to screw the other side, okay? And they're not doing anything good for the country at this point. They're just trying to maintain power. So I have no faith in their ability to solve any problem as complicated as this, but that's what it's going to take, and I think that's what you're saying.
I agree with that, and I'll balance Steve out with a little bit of positivity. The thing that may motivate some kind of common sense bipartisan solution or whatever is that these state university systems and state schools are immensely powerful in those states and can be a pretty big motivating factor about putting pressure on their state representatives to say, hey, figure this out. And there's all kinds of things in terms of research and funding. I mean, these state university systems are powerful in their home states. And so if enough of that pressure lands on their representatives, it could be a motivating factor to get some solution.
Yeah, that's true. And because a lot of those same people who are, getting the athletic building named after them are also donating a ton of money to their state senators and representatives and all that stuff. So, yeah, very powerful for sure. But the problem is it's going to take years. This is not something that Congress is going to solve in February or whatever.
No.
That just isn't going to happen.
No, it would take almost like some kind of COVID exception clause, and that in terms of that, I totally agree with you. There's not enough will or motivation or just Congress working enough to pull something like that off for the short term, and by short term, it might mean the next 2 years.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think we said what we're going to say on this. I mean, you guys understand the issues. We don't have good answers, but
no one does.
That's what's going on. No.
So we can give ourselves off the hook for not figuring this out because no one else is.
Yeah. Although I think, frankly, you and I together would, if we could be given the power to act, I think you and I together could figure out a better solution than any member of Congress ever could.
Oh man, talk about your buddy cop movie premise right there.
Really, that's what I mean. But when people like you and I, who are polar opposite in almost every way in terms of belief systems, could sit down and have a rational discussion about it and figure it out, that says a lot about the people we elect over and over and over again and put into positions of power. Because they're not about the people; they're just about maintaining their own personal power,
And I totally agree. And what this is going to take is it's going to take a slaughtering house of sacred cows, and that's actually the problem, right? Not just like a couple sacrificial cows. This is like line up the sacred cows out the barn door and get the sledgehammer and the head chopping machine out and then just run them through. Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about sacred cows at a lot of different levels. And that's what it's going to take. Because you got to be willing to flatten it to rebuild it. And that's where the will is probably, I wouldn't have much confidence in that there's enough critical mass of will to do that right now.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so we're going to return to the world of where they are paid to play in professional sports and look a little bit at the return and sort of like, does anyone care? What are the ratings like? What does this look like in terms of the sports media landscape? Basically, we have Major League Baseball in full swing in its regular season. We have NHL now into the kind of pseudo second round of its playoffs, and you have the NBA just kicked off its round one after that, whatever that mini season was. Plus, you got the PGA coming back strong. You have NASCAR running races. So you've got a critical mass And then obviously the NFL, which I will concede I will lose my bet. I'd be happy to double down to see if we play the full season, but we'll talk about that later. So here in a couple weeks, you're going to have basically a similar slate of games that would have been normal. In fact, maybe even more, because the NBA and NHL wouldn't necessarily be, by the time football's in swing, wouldn't have been this deep in their, wouldn't be playing even to some degree, or be just getting ready to play again. So they're back, and there's a lot of mixed data on does anyone care or not. I think the one big takeaway, and this is across all these sports, is there hasn't been the huge ratings that some people predicted in terms of when sports returned. It's not cratering either, right? I think in some degree it's keeping a certain level of norm with some fluctuations, but it's not like any of these sports and are seeing ratings bonanzas in their return. And there's lots of different reasons for that. But, baseball is a bit of a mixed bag, but maybe with a little bit of positive trends. The NHL, which obviously was in a rating juggernaut anyway, actually is showing anywhere from 10 to 15% increase in year-to-year viewership, especially of their primetime games. The NBA seems to be struggling a little bit. And now, if longtime listeners of the show, we were talking about dips in the NBA ratings going back to week 1 of this regular season, which was a completely status quo normal world. So, does the NBA have a ratings problem? It was a story before COVID, and seems to be continuing with that. I think some of these last couple nights, the prime time, like Clippers, Lakers, or whatever, what's the premier series right now? I haven't even.
Well, the Clippers, Portland, and then the Lakers, Portland is probably the premier one because of Damian Lillard and LeBron James.
Yeah. So, and they're getting right anywhere depending, right in that 9:30 to 10:30 slot. I think that those latest games from a night or two ago were pulling about 3 million viewers in that time slot. But it's dipping as low as 1 million on some of those other games. Now, there is a whole host of reasons, and I think anyone who draws distinct reasons for this is just not looking at the full picture. There's a couple things we've talked about many times, is just viewing and consumption habits have changed drastically, and I think COVID is having an effect on that. And also, these traditional, Nielsen and others that collect this data there's no standards for this. They're all doing different things. Some are including streaming, some aren't including streaming, et cetera, et cetera. So there's not that, when it was 3 networks, you could standardize the metrics. The metrics aren't standardized anymore. So we don't even necessarily know what we're looking at with these numbers.
Have you ever been contacted by Nielsen?
No, I have not. I have. It's my dream.
Yeah, I have a couple times actually. And it was years and years and years ago when I was a kid, we got contacted. And back then, in the 80s and 90s, you got a card and you had to fill it out.
Yeah, like a diary.
You just kept track of what and so I remember on my diary there were a couple of shows I didn't get to watch that week, but I wanted to support, so I put down that I watch them. So I don't know how there's a accuracy factor, and now basically they just, if you agree, they can just track you online and it's Big Brother you into figuring out what you watch. But yeah, the streaming part and all that. I think you can simplify, I think, the ratings trends right now for the sports into saying golf is way up, baseball is up by their standards, NHL is up by their standards, and the NBA has underperformed. I think if you wanted to simplify kind of where we are with ratings, that's kind of where we are. The other thing about this, like, I'm a huge Laker fan. Everybody knows this. I've watched not 1 second of Laker basketball this year. I chose to not do that because they got overly political for me. And so I just didn't want to watch it. And there's that part of it. The NBA, you can agree or disagree with the messaging, and we're not here to discuss that. But I think the messaging, if any league has gone farther than the others as to their messaging with regard to the unrest in the country right now, it's the NBA. And that has turned people off, and I think that is a factor in why the NBA ratings are down. Golf has done the least amount of messaging. What's happening with golf? Golf ratings are way up. They haven't turned off their fans. The NBA has turned off some people. People like me, are not watching NBA. And so that's a part. You're right into saying, I agree with you in saying there's a whole bunch of factors, a billion factors. But that is a part of it that the NBA should not ignore. To a certain extent, people want, I think what all sports leagues need to remember, people want to be entertained. I don't particularly want to hear anybody's opinion on anything. When I turn on a Laker basketball game, I really just want to watch a basketball game. When I turn on my Dodger baseball game, I just want to watch a baseball game. I don't want to be beaten over the head with anybody's political message. It is entertainment in the end of the day. And I think sometimes people, for the people who are running the sports and the athletes themselves, kind of forget that. And it's their league. They do what they want. But I think that's part of it. Baseball, I don't know why baseball has the ratings are all up across the board in baseball. Regional sports networks, national games, almost every demographic. I saw that. I guess the over 55 male demographic for the network games is down a little bit, but beyond that, they're basically
That's a
up.
positive
Why?
for baseball, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's so baseball has gotten the rebound off the sports drought that everybody wanted. And despite the fact that I think you could legitimately question the legitimacy of the season when you have a 60-game season, is that even what is it going to mean and all that? But baseball hasn't done a ton of messaging either, so I think you can't ignore the effect of the social messaging on the ratings because I think that is a component to it.
No, I think it's undeniably a component. I would say that I have literally no problems with anything the NBA did on that front, and I have watched 0 minutes of the NBA.
Well, you're not an NBA fan,
Well,
though. I mean, anyway.
I haven't been as much lately, but I have.
Yeah.
I have been.
Like, I'm a much bigger NBA fan than you.
No doubt about that.
I think. Yeah. And I just haven't, because it just turned me off, and I just don't want to watch it, and I'm better off for it.
And I'm just saying, like, I don't know but the reverse, I don't know if it's true either. It's not like, oh, they're the woke sports league. I'm going to start tuning in. Like, it doesn't. I have no motivation
that's
that way
what I'm
either.
saying. Yeah, it's more complicated. And I'm not trying to say that that's the only reason why the ratings are down. The NBA has been trending down forever, a long time. For years. And it's not just all the woke sports league stuff. That is a component to it, and they've been like that for a while. But that's not the only reason. Part of it is just like you said. People are trending down generally for watching television. Are they counting streaming or are they not counting streaming? I think the younger generation are just less likely to watch anything.
I mean,
period.
The other night, I had three. I mean, this is maybe a look into my own brain disease, but I had three things streaming simultaneously, and I'm pretty sure that none of those are counted. But here in my household, I had three things of programming coming into my household, but I don't think are getting counted. So it's just fascinating. These are a couple other reasons around, maybe even specifically the NBA, that I find interesting in terms of factors. Is one, you're talking about a lot more day games, right? So like who's watching, 2:00 on a work day, right? It's difficult.
More people though, because a lot more people working from home than they ever were.
Sure, but I work from home and I still don't feel like I have a chance to turn on a game.
Well, that's you, but I'm saying generally speaking, more people are watching from home because they are at their home. Even if they're not paying attention, the TV might be on in their office behind.
True. The big mistake I think the NBA made, and I think I said it at the time when we were kind of reviewing these plans, and I think they messed up with the fake start. Jump into the playoffs, because I think one thing, and I think this is actually a thing you can say positively, and I'm not a big fan of what they did, but baseball, a 60-game regular season is stakes, right? Every game, man, you can't, like in a typical baseball season, a team can struggle in the dog days and drop 8 of 10 or, 10 of 15 or something like that, and not completely crush their season, right? Because most teams have similar dips, et cetera, et cetera. It's a long season. 60 games, I mean, that is ridiculous in terms of a baseball season. And every game does matter. So I think for viewers, if you're turning into the Nationals or the Dodgers or the Mets or whatever, where you might have just said, whatever, like wake me up in September, you can't have that mentality. Games that you drop or going on a losing streak or dropping a few series back to back have massive implications for what you're going to do. And I think the NBA with this, I think really low stakes re-entry really hurt them because it was like it felt like a preseason. You're watching a lot of bad basketball teams, and I don't think it let them jumpstart their return with a playoffs type of atmosphere. And I think that's going to turn out to be a bit of a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cynical contract money grab is what it was. In terms of baseball, I just as an example of what you're talking about, my instant thought when I saw 60-game baseball season was, oh my God, Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler usually start very slow. That's what's going through my Dodgers, and so my thought was that can't happen this year. They need to jump out the gate immediately and be good. Fortunately, they have for my rooting interest, but there's a part of it. But there's a cynical ratings, money grab part. There's a break even point in every business. You have a break even point, right? It's through a certain amount of the year. If your sales stay the same after that date, you're gonna make it's all profit. From a basic financial standpoint, baseball has this issue. You may have a more exciting season for 60 games, but they're not going to make as much money with a 60-game season, no matter how exciting it is, than if they had 182 games. And so, while I don't disagree with you that, at least from some people's perspective, the season is more exciting. For example, I was rooting for Kershaw and Buehler to be good immediately, and I paid more attention to their early starts. But it's all about money, and they're just not broadcasting enough games to make more money. The ratings aren't going so huge that the advertising rates can go up so far that they can make up for another 120 games.
No.
That's the problem.
No, and I'm not suggesting that that's what they should move to. I'm just saying that it's probably a reason why you see a bit of an uptake in their ratings in this weird season.
Part of it, yeah, certainly. Part of it. I'm honestly a bit surprised that the ratings are as high as they are for baseball. I really am. Golf, no, because number one, Tiger was in it at least a little bit for the PGA Championship. He made the cut. He wasn't struggling horribly. He wasn't in contention. But anytime Tiger's involved at all, golf ratings are through the roof. I don't know if you all understand this. Chris, I know you do. But I don't know if people out there really, truly understand. Love or hate Tiger Woods, because there's a lot that I dislike about the guy. He is Mr. Golf, okay? He and he alone have done more for this sport than anybody in golf ever has. And I'm saying include Jack Nicholson, include Johnny Miller, all those guys. Tiger Woods has driven by himself the huge amount of money that's now involved in the sport. And so anytime he's involved, it's ratings bonanza, and he has been. So that's a big part of it, I think. And the other thing is, the PGA Championship was on prime time.
Yeah.
By the way, because of where it was located, it was in California. I think it was in California. It was on somewhere on the West Coast. And so you had Saturday night golf at 7 p.m. and that's ratings bonanza also.
Yeah,
that's the other
I'm
part.
not a golf fan, but I do obviously know enough people, and there's enough people in the sports media that I consume that are, and they've said that they've all talked about that they love West Coast golf tournaments for that exact reason. It's not in the middle of the afternoon on the East Coast. They're not not having to make trade-offs with other activities. It's in prime time. They can settle in at a time they probably are more traditionally watching TV anyway. Yeah, all golf fans love a West Coast tournament.
Yeah. I think the PGA would be wise to have every single tournament on the West Coast. I mean, they can't do that for a billion reasons, and I'm just being facetious, but it would be better for the sport if they figured out how to do it, how to have primetime Saturday night, Sunday night golf. The problem is you can't play in golf in the dark.
No.
Oh, mate. So you're just by nature kind of limiting yourself to the West Coast, which isn't going to happen,
And there's things like, it's a social distancing sport by design, so it doesn't read weird on television. Crowds, who cares? I'm sure they add a little bit, but they're not really. The lack of crowds really isn't. There's a difference. You watch an NBA or NHL playoff game with 20,000 screaming maniacs, it adds to the broadcast. There's no doubt about that. It doesn't really affect golf.
Golf makes no difference. Yeah. Golf makes no difference whatsoever. I watched a little bit of that. I'm not a huge golf nut either, but I watched a little bit of the PGA tournament, and the no crowds made zero difference. Whereas baseball's really freaking weird. And what makes weirder, by the way, is their in case people don't realize this, I don't know if the NBA, I haven't watched the NBA, so I don't know if the NBA's doing it, but baseball, the networks are bringing in crowd noise.
I hate that.
That doesn't, it drives me insane. I would just rather watch it with no crowd noise. Don't fake the crowd noise. And the cutouts in the stand are stupid. I think the whole thing is dumb. The way they're doing it.
I've watched.
Although I did see. Did you see this, Chris, the other day? The Oakland A's are apparently putting giant teddy bears in the stands, and one of them got hit dead in the head with a foul ball. Yeah, and this teddy bear's head flew backwards, and it's like the Kennedy assassination. Pretty funny. But be that as it may, I don't like the fake crowd noise. It adds nothing. It turns me off.
I've watched a good amount of NHL hockey, although that's going to probably decrease here as my Caps were embarrassed and shuttled right out of the playoffs by a coach that won the Stanley Cup that they didn't feel the need to bring back. And they actually I think they've done a really good job. They're using 2 bubble cities, so same philosophy as the NBA, except for 2, not 1. But I have to really hats off to the production designers in these NHL bubbles because they just embraced it. They basically created they covered the seats so that you could broadcast stuff on top of them. So that it gives it like an eerie quality. It makes it kind of icy in a way, that because I'm watching hockey in August. It's a little disconcerting. I don't know. They just sort of embraced the emptiness and then had like a really smart production team, both physically and broadcast, that sort of leaned into it, and it just kind of feels like this weird, almost kind of surreal environment with these like kind of muslin coverings of the seats. It actually has a pretty neat effect. I do miss the crowds and stuff as well, but I think at least they said, let's just take some like kind of almost artistic view of how to shoot this rather than like try to equate fans.
Oh, it's a better idea. Yeah, I haven't seen it. I haven't watched any hockey. I'm not a big enough hockey fan, as you know. But yeah, that idea sounds much better than what baseball has done. To me. But I mean, I don't know how much that's having an effect on the rating. It's having an effect on your enjoyment.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's moving the needle.
But in terms of the rating drivers, I do think there's something to the idea that NBA is down, baseball is up, NHL is up. There's reasons behind that that are probably more complicated than what we're saying here, but that's the trend. Golf, I get it. It's the Tiger effect, prime time. That makes sense, but I think the social stuff is affecting the NBA in ways that the other leagues it's not, and that's what I think is driving the big drop with the NBA.
Also, I just think the NBA product is actually pretty poor, which I have been a big NBA.
Well, the bubble thing didn't matter a lot.
That's what I'm saying. Like they already had problems.
The Lakers and the Bucks treated it like they didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
From the like the Lakers were like 3-8 or something, and the Bucks were about the same. They were the 2 best teams in the NBA. They acted like they utterly did not want to be there in terms of the way they were playing. So yeah, that's part of it for sure. Like I'm not trying to simplify it just because I have a political view of it.
No,
you're right. I mean, that's a definite part of it. Is the bubble thing was kind of phony and weird, and the bubble teams cared a lot. The Trailblazers were one of them. The Phoenix Suns were one of them. They didn't make it, but yeah, I mean. For sure, that's a big part of it.
They just should have made They just should have made a play-in tournament and let the top 4 teams in each conference rest or whatever. Who knows? And I was more talking about. I think the product of the NBA is lame. This has nothing to do with COVID or social issues. I just think. And I've been, I am a sellout, Steve. I've been watching The Last Dance now that it's a little easier to watch when it's on Netflix, and this was an era of the NBA that I cared about a great deal and really enjoyed. I kind of was a Magic Bird kid, and then kind of stuck with it even through the kind of Lakers Shaq era. And then it fell off for me, and I just think the star-driven league is I'm watching these Bulls teams, and they were teams. I mean, obviously Michael Jordan is a megastar, no denying that, but they actually still built teams, and these teams that stayed together. I mean, those Jordan teams, I mean, the Will Paxson and Luke Longleys of the world, they were on those teams for a long time.
Pippen.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can actually have a team that goes, and then, you talk about the Pistons and the Lakers and the Celtics, and it just was a different thing. I just find it so hard to get into the NBA product, personally.
Yeah, no, I think that's a part of it. I think free agency, generally speaking, has been bad for the fans of every league. I don't think free agency is better for the players, and I get that, but the fans want to see teams develop over time. It's the same thing with the NFL. A bunch of hired gunslingers, doesn't do much for the fans. It's good for the players, and I'm not, you guys do you. I get it, but it's not nearly as fun to watch from a fan perspective when you can watch these teams over. You can watch your team over years continually develop. I think that's much better overall. That's just not financially. It doesn't work for the players, and I get it. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I wasn't a Bulls fan, obviously, but that team stayed together. My Lakers team was the same core group of players for a decade. Magic, Worthy, Kareem, and a couple others, AC Green. Those guys were together, and you couldn't do that in today's world. You couldn't do that in today's world because of the money. Look at the Golden State Warriors.
Well, you look at Kawhi Leonard, right? Which I actually kind of got into the Kawhi Leonard Toronto run last year. I thought that was a great story. I have a lot of friends in Toronto. I spent a lot of time working out of there, so I got some affection for the city. So I was happy for them from a rooting perspective. And now he's on the Clippers. It's just like it's weird. In fact, and so the only engaging storyline to me is, can this dude win 2 back-to-back championships on 2 different teams, which is interesting as a feat, but kind of depressing at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's also why a lot of the younger generation are not fans of teams, or fans of players. Yeah. For that reason, there's a group of people that are Kawhi Leonard fans, for example, and I would assume they've followed their viewing history from Toronto to the Clippers because of Kawhi Leonard, whereas years ago, it would have been, years ago, the Clippers had no fans, so that's a bad example. But years ago, it would have been the core group of Toronto fans and the core group of Clippers fans are watching their team no matter what. Now that's a smaller, you and I do that. I'm an anachronism now. Say it like that.
Yeah. No.
I'm an anachronism, generally speaking, and I realize that. But specifically to viewing history, it's not the wave of the future.
No.
Which isn't necessarily good for the sports.
I think they're gonna have to figure some of that out for sure. Well, Steve, I think that brings us to the end of our talking points today.
It does. Yeah, it's a really interesting time in sports. I'm more interested at this point now in seeing what happens in 2021 next year as a result of what's gone on this year. And so maybe we'll do a future prediction show or something in the next couple of weeks.
Well, yeah, I mean, as the NHL playoffs basically finish out their kind of round 2, round 1.5, whatever you want to call it, I'm thinking, wow, in a normal year, I'm just starting to be paying attention to training, like prepping for hockey training camp, and they're not even into the second round of the playoffs.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So another segment for another day, perhaps another show. We'll talk about what's going to happen next year. Yeah. But we're out of time.
So anything interesting in Hogstye land?
No, we're just kind of prepping for the season. We got excluded from training camp, which isn't surprising. The Redskins, or the whatever you call them now, only took the top 10 reporters, like individually, names like Lake Lewis got cut out, and I didn't feel so bad they cut us out. So we're just waiting for the season to start.
Hanging on every beat reporter that did get in's tweet about dropped Haskins passes.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's kind of like a have or have not thing. It's like, ooh, we got in, and
All right. Well, we will see you in 2 weeks.